Welcome to Legacy Therapy, the podcast that will teach you, in bite-sized chunks, how to leave a stress-free legacy so loved ones can focus on people, not paperwork, when you become ill or pass away. Here is your host and financial advocate, Stacey Golden-Lisnock.
Hello and welcome to the 15th episode of Legacy Therapy, planning techniques for a stress-free legacy. This is Stacey Golden-Lisnock, your financial advocate. And today I am excited to introduce to you Lorrie Richins. And Lorrie is a personal and family empowerment coach, an energy healing facilitator, body language advisor, and a certified emotion code practitioner. She has spent a lifetime seeking understanding and wisdom regarding the purpose of pain and suffering in our lives. Having successfully overcome past physical and emotional trauma, Lorrie now empowers others to do the same. Her business, Whole Family Mentoring, focuses on helping families heal and feel whole again. She shares positive family messages during the Family First segment each week on Allison H. Larson Spotlight Radio Show, and is the up-and-coming author of the book entitled Fortified: 10 Strategies to Strengthen Your Family and Live a Meaningful Life. Lorrie, she has been married for 35 years and the mother of 7, and she considers this to be her greatest joy and accomplishment. Welcome, Lorrie. That is a big accomplishment, I have to say. How are you today?
Nice to be with you, Stacey. Thank you for having me.
Great. I'm so happy to have you too. I know what you do is so important. Wanted to just start out. I noticed in your bio that you are on a weekly show with Allison, and I've met Allison personally. She's a wonderful person. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think people could benefit, definitely. But what kinds of things do you talk about on a weekly basis on that show? What was the name of the show again? It's called
Spotlight Radio Show. Yep, it's on the Voice America channel.
Okay.
Yep. So I have a segment that I do that helps to just kind of bring the message back to the family and how we can fortify the family. And it's an interesting how I came across Allison a couple of years ago. I happened to be in my kitchen and I had this impression to just go to my phone and to look at my Facebook feed, and her show happened to be being aired at that time. And I put in the comment section that I wanted to be on her show, and friended her on Facebook. And interestingly, exactly a year later to the month, she contacted me and I ended up on her show, and I'm a regular guest since then. So it's really important that when people feel like they're on a mission, if they have a purpose to fulfill, to know that, you know, there's a lot of assistance that can come. And if you follow your intuition and inspiration, a lot of great things can happen.
That's true. Very true. So tell us a little bit about your background. I know you've come a long way. So whatever you would like to share in that regard, I think it would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I was actually born into a very broken, challenging family environment. And it wasn't until I had married and it was about a couple of years after I was married that I started to really feel the ramifications of some of the trauma that I experienced when I was young. And it's important for people to understand and recognize something I didn't know at the time. So I actually went to a counselor who said that when people are experiencing post-traumatic syndrome, it will come after you feel like you're in a safe environment. So it started to happen for me about 2 years or so after I had been married, and the nightmares were starting, and I would scream in my sleep, and I was having some pretty intense emotional responses, and I didn't know where they were rooted in, and it didn't really come to my kind of mental awareness until I was about 40 years old. And it's like something in my brain release the information that had been locked away for all of those years. And I realized that it's such a safeguarding effect that our body has, to where we just kind of lock away information that as children we can't survive until we're ready to handle it. But even then, at 40 years old, just the culmination of all of the pain and the circumstances that I was dealing presently with, got to a point where what I survived as a child nearly killed me as an adult when I set a date to take my life. And so, for those who are listening to this, it's really important. In my bio, you read how I've spent a lifetime learning about the value of pain in our lives, because people don't cope well when pain seems senseless, when suffering seems senseless. And so for me, when I was able to find value in those experiences and realize that it actually made me, it directed my path in a way that made me more useful to the Lord, it changed everything for me. So that's what I like to do as far as working with clients. I help them to recognize the gift that they've been given, even if it's been wrapped in an ugly package.
Boy, that's amazing. And it just brings to mind how when people remember things from their childhood later in life, and there's so much doubt around that they're making it up. It's like, why would you just now remember it? And you really explained it well, in that it's a protective mechanism that we have, and something else will trigger that memory later on. And so it's important, I think, that people realize that those people aren't making up all of these things just for the fact that they want to make up a horrible story.
Yes, and the other thing I realized too is there are a lot of people out there who had been suffering and are experiencing what I experienced, and I realized that I didn't have some of the resources that I now make available for other people. That's one of the passions that I have, to help people know that there's someone out there who understands the language. I speak the language of that kind of pain. I speak the language of what it's like to survive something like that. And some people have a hard time vocalizing the extremity, the extreme circumstances of their lives. They wonder if they'll be believed, or they'll wonder if somebody has the ability to handle what's happened to them. So I deal with an array of different circumstances, basic things with little children, to generational issues. I love when I work with grandparents and their daughters and their children, and we get to see patterns that need to be corrected. And the people who are willing to invest the time and energy into healing some of those generational pains that get passed down through their posterity.
Yeah, that reminds me too of really the purpose of this Legacy Therapy podcast is to enlighten people as to what kind of damage can be left in the wake of a person passing when they haven't done proper planning. And it does cause families to be very nasty to each other, and to never speak with each other, to sue each other. Do you have some stories you can kind of relate on that, of things we don't want to repeat, that can easily be corrected before somebody passes away, but maybe it isn't in their ability because they don't realize it, and maybe you can enlighten them on that.
Yeah. So people in my generation, I'm 54 years old, and what I'm finding is that there's a pretty substantial number of people who have had the the parental generation above me, so 70s kind of period, where a lot of things happened in their lives that were kept secret. Things get kept secret in our current day as well, but it was really prominent back then, and people didn't want to talk about it. People didn't want to put it on the table. And so these later generations have a fierceness to them, where they want the truth of their lives. And we've lived by a lot of labels and lies in our lives that are really impacting and harming the generations that are still yet to come. And so I can't change the fact that certain people aren't willing to take responsibility for what they did or for what may have happened to them. All I can say is that I have several techniques and skills that I use when I'm working with clients to help them to correct the pattern of dysfunction. And one of those is called the see, stop, start pattern. And what I mean by that is people who are born into dysfunction or harm don't fully understand the level of dysfunction until they've had their eyes open to it, because it's all that they know.
Right.
And that's how it was for me. And they continue the pattern simply because it's how, it's what gets recited in their brain. It's what they've seen. It's what their body wants to do because it was done to them. And so it's really important to sometimes have somebody there helping them to see what needs to be corrected. And that's how it was for me. I became a pattern seeker. I started watching other families that didn't have the trauma that I did and thought there's a better way. And then we have to stop what ended up being dysfunctional patterns that may have been passed down. And the reason that's really important to do this next step is I use the analogy of the Notre Dame Cathedral. And as it turned out, I did some research after it burned. Do you remember when it, yeah, you probably saw the footage of
Yeah.
the cathedral burning.
Hmm.
And in fact, there were like 5,000 wooden beams up in the rafters. And over the years, rather than taking out the old and replacing them with new, they simply added new. And that created more fuel for this major fire. And so it's really important when we see that we have a problem that we stop the pattern that's adding that fuel before we start something new, before we add something in. So, and of course, the third one is to start the new pattern. And it's helpful to have a life coach, which I am, to help people to understand the better way, because sometimes they know that they're not doing it correctly. They just don't know how to do it better.
Yeah, that whole saying, you don't know what you don't know, just keeps coming up over and over and over again. So if you've never seen it, you don't know that it exists. And I think about when they talk about the pilgrims or whomever it was way back when there was a ship on the horizon, they didn't even see it because their eyes didn't recognize it as being something because it was so foreign. Is that kind of what you're talking about? It just isn't in your
Yes,
wheelhouse.
and also there's a grieving process that your soul ends up going through when you realize what you could have had and what you should have had and didn't. And so there can be some real envy, there can be some real just emotional distress that comes during that period. And you recognize you can't get the years back where it should have been better for you. And really your power lies in what you can do for yourself now and your children. So I can't change the past for other people, but I can sure go on that past and find the pearls of wisdom that come from that trauma so that they can empower the next generation, so that they can feel like it was not a waste, like it was actually that gift that can keep on giving instead of this trauma that ends up passing down through the posterity.
That is so true. And for people that think that they were, dealt this bad hand and they just live in that space where they're just upset and feel that they got this rotten life when somebody else that they see was this like golden child. They do have a gift that other person can't ever give to other humans and help them. And I see that you've done like a huge benefit to society for helping people. Do you have any stories that you could relate specifically when someone has passed and they failed to make amends, or they've made things worse for their family by maybe favoring one child over another, just not having the ability to verbalize and have a conversation about what their wishes are and how things are going to be when they're gone. And so then that leaves the family um, to have to deal with it themselves. And most people don't have the right skills set to have it be a favorable outcome for the most part.
I'm
So,
going to change my answer a little bit from what you're asking, but it has value, and I think you'll appreciate
okay.
what this message has. So it just kind of propelled me into this mindset. So it's interesting. My stepfather would have been one of my mom's husbands. Um, Died, and he had had some real traumatic experiences in his own life and passed that down to us as children. And interestingly, there's a beautiful book called My Friendship with Mr. Rogers. I'm proud of you. My Friendship with Mr. Rogers. And I realized over time, my mom had been married 3 times, and I hadn't found my birth father until just like 3 years ago. So I had a lot of weaving in and out in my life of men that either harmed us or just didn't stay. And so I realized that this book was a really therapeutic surrogate way for me to receive some really paternal, fatherly counsel and advice. And it was so touching. I remember feeling myself getting really tender and emotional. My husband was trying to sleep next to me. And so I got out of the room. I went out of the room, went in the living room, and I sat on the couch in my robe and was reading this book. And it's really important when people have been harmed that they do all they can to keep their heart soft, because we naturally harden when we've been hurt. And it's a protective mechanism, once again. And so there are times I find that the Lord has to have me in a certain mindset, in a certain moment, for me to have an experience that helps me heal. And no matter how desperate I am, there's a saying that says desperation impedes inspiration. So it's important not to become desperate. Just be patient and kind of wait through the process of healing. Get the help that you need. But in this moment, my stepfather had died, and I actually felt him near me, and I could actually see him standing near my couch. And he had somebody with him, and he was very different than what I remembered here on earth. He was much younger, and I wasn't afraid of him. He had struck me, he had struck my mother, he had harmed us, and he was not the man that I remembered when he had still been alive. And it was a really important moment for me, because I heard him say that he was sorry. He asked my forgiveness. And I could also see that he was aware that he could have been this really helpful, healing, fatherly figure, and he wasn't. And he took that to the grave with him. And the rest of us had to lick our wounds afterwards, trying to heal from the harm that had been done. And so it doesn't completely answer your question, except to say that it's better to say what needs to be said and heal those relationships and take responsibility for what you've done before you die, and to be able to repair some of that damage that's been done, because it's much harder to have that family generation um, uh, trauma corrected once they're gone. And so, if there's anyone listening to this, I really plead to them to do what's necessary in order to lift those burdens that the posterity carry later. And also, there's another aspect. I was talking with a client recently, and she felt courageous enough to share that she had been abused, and her mother is older now, and she loves her mother dearly. And as this woman was coming to terms with the events of her life and what really happened, it was very difficult for her to face that. And she wondered if she should tell her mother. And I said, I really think it's important that parents know what happened to their children. And we tend to protect our parents from the truth of our lives. And I said, I know what it's like as a parent to find out things had happened to my children, whether it was at school or whatever it happened to be, and some traumatic event that they had. And then I find out later, and I wasn't part of the problem solving. And I want my children to know I'm safe and I'm a resource to assist them. And you have to build that trust so that they can feel like they can come to you. So parents, this woman chose not to do that. She didn't want to burden her mother with that information. And that saddens me a bit, because this woman needs to hear certain things she's never been told. Like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. If I had known, I would have done something about it. I wish I could have supported you through that. And instead, all of these years, she hasn't heard what her soul needed to hear, and may never, because she won't tell. So parents, be approachable. Actually open doors and tell your children, you can tell me anything. It's important that I hear, because I want to give you the support that you deserve.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Good advice. And I know I keep coming back to this legacy part of it because I am really desperately trying to help as many families as I can not suffer the consequences of no planning or poor planning, and then a person leaves this earth not even knowing what mess they left behind. And it really, I was at my doctor's office, and I was mentioning to the nurse what I'm up to, and she all welled up and told me that when she was about 10 years old, her grandfather passed away, and it was her father's father. And what happened was those siblings started fighting because the grandfather didn't leave proper instructions or didn't have, all of his stuff together. And so the brothers all fought amongst themselves, and the end result was they no longer spoke to each other, which for this nurse at about 10 years old, her cousins, which she grew up with from when she was an infant, were just ripped out of her life for like the next 10 years. And it just left this real void and just hurt, as you can imagine. And it was all because of a family rift over the grandfather's passing. So,
So
mhm.
yes, that is typical. I unfortunately it happens a lot, but it can happen. So planning for death is very important. I'm married to a CPA. He has his own firm. He understands what it's like when people die and their finances are not all in place. We've also gone to a funeral estate that was in the family that had died, and it was remarkable the response of people just clamoring for certain items, and it just didn't seem like a very respectful approach to the life, that what was left behind by the person that we all loved. But there's also a different kind of order that needs to be put into our lives. And I didn't know who my father was. And the person that I was told who was my father when I was a young girl um, was different than the name that was on my birth certificate. And I waited for many, many, many years before I came to the realization, if I don't find this person, and if I don't tell him I'm his daughter, then I've got grandparents, I've got people on his side that I may never meet. And so yeah, it was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe we contacted this person that my mom had told me was my father, and told him that that we thought he was my dad. And anyway, that was incredibly painful because it was a complicated situation, and they insisted on, he was very kind, but his wife was suspicious and insisted on DNA evidence. So I had to get my blood drawn and tested, and as it turned out, he wasn't my dad.
Oh,
And from that point on, my mom couldn't tell me who my father was. So I searched probably in total about 25 years for my dad, and finally I found him through ancestry DNA
wow.
about 3 years ago. And it was again one of those miracle situations. I can attest to your audience members that God is the great orchestrator of our lives. And for Christmas, my children gave me an ancestry DNA test, just wanting me to find out maybe where my ancestors were from, and had no idea that within a year it would actually connect me with my father. And I found out I had 4 additional siblings. So after multiple marriages, I have 19 children as siblings within that family. And most of us are fractured. Most of us are broken. And I had about a year and a half of association with my dad. And then he felt it was wise to move on without me. And so that was heart wrenching. But in the end, I'm so grateful. I now know who my father is. I know who my grandparents are. I know who my other siblings are. But the real tragedy also is when people die with the truth of who their children are or who their parents are. And the records are wrong. Birth records are wrong. And genealogy records are wrong. My dad gave me a gift and actually took me to court and had me stand before a judge to get permission to have my birth certificate updated. And now the right man's name is on my birth certificate. And now my children know who their heritage, what their heritage is. So, in addition to all of the financial things that need to get in order, do what you can to make sure that those other records are in order, because sometimes, those discoveries never become known.
Wow. You gave me goose pimples there. That's really,
I've
that's
lived
really
quite a
profound.
life.
Sorry, what?
I've lived quite a life.
Yeah. Wow. That is an amazing story. Wow. So there's so much to think about. And yeah, you're right. So many people, they do pass away with secrets that are never revealed that could be beneficial to those that are left behind. And so that's a really good point. I wanted to see, I know you've got this book and you have something you want to offer to the audience. Can you talk about that?
Yes, yes. I'm so pleased about this book. It's called 10 Fortified 10 Strategies to Strengthen Your Family and Live a Meaningful Life. And what I realized is with all the life experiences that I've had and being a storyteller, all the noble people I've encountered and the challenges that they've overcome and how their families learned these important life lessons, I compiled an array of different, really incredible stories that give people hope on how they can have a happier future, how they can stabilize their family. They can learn from other people's experiences without feeling preached at. And it has an undercurrent of faith and peace. And so I'm really proud of this book. And so, what I'd like to offer your listeners is a chapter of my book. Chapter 8 is one of my favorites. I sent it to you.
Yes.
And it's one of my favorites. And I'd like to offer a free session as well for anyone who would like to work with me as a life coach and to help them to recognize that there are all kinds of coaches out there who have a real powerful approach. And mine is a kind of a backdoor approach to a front door problem. And so many people face fear when they have to deal with the reality, the truth of their lives. And sometimes they just need that maternal voice that says, I understand, I know, I've been there. I tell stories to help them to recognize what's possible, what approaches they could take so they don't feel like they're forced into a place that they're not comfortable with. And so much can be resolved, so much truth's already within them. They just need to have a safe place to let it fall and to have somebody to help, decipher it with them and encourage and hold their space while they address the hard things that they have to address in life. So I have a very maternal loving approach to my clients, and I get real attached to the outcome. I have a vested interest in helping them to do well in life and to heal.
Yeah. It sounds so refreshing that you have the opportunity to really just release all of that and actually move into another chapter of your life. But you do need to get help in order for that to happen. I don't think people can self-counsel.
Sometimes it can be really helpful. Like I said, I became a pattern seeker, but I took the long way.
Mm-hmm.
There's different kind of investments people make in their health and well-being. It's financial, it's time, it's energy, and sometimes people delay that investment. And I think, well, what kind of price are you going to pay later if
Right.
you don't get the help now? And there's two commodities, that pass. That we spend time and money, and we can really expedite getting to a better place for ourselves and for our family members when we get the support that we need. Invest in ourselves has big dividends later.
Yes. So how would they get the book and the free session?
Yes, actually, I can send the chapter if I have their email. That would be very easy to do. And the book's actually still in the process of being finalized and before it's in print. But I have the chapters that I send out. And again, you can go to my website, wholefamilymentoring.com. WHOLE mentoring.com. And you can learn a bit more about me, and you can contact me through that site as well. And I'd be happy to send out that chapter and give that free session. And if nothing else, if people can just take away from this that the Lord is placing people in the paths of those who need certain personalities, certain skills, certain understandings. And if I'm that person for somebody listening, it would be an honor to be to partner with them to get where they need to go, and to know that they're not alone.
Wow, that's really generous. Thank you so much. And I will also have in the show notes that information so people could, if they're driving or jogging or whatever they're doing, they can look for it later. So Lorrie Richins, I'm sure they could Google you as well.
I don't know. I was actually a candidate for state representative not long ago, so you'll probably find out information if you Google me about that.
Oh, nice.
Probably going to my website.
Okay, wholefamilymentoring.com.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. Well, I think we will wrap it up. I always like to mention at the end of a podcast to go to my website as well, gotittogethernow.com, and check out the course, the emergency info file. We are almost ready to release that. And so get on the wait list there and check it out, because I believe that everyone deserves to have a stress-free legacy, or to leave a stress-free legacy for their families. And therefore, maybe you can avert your families, not your family that you leave behind, to love each other and not be fighting with one another because you didn't have things in order. And what I'm finding too, a lot of times it's one particular person in the family that gets all of the work and all of the criticism. And that's not appreciated as much either. So with that, I will say we will be signing off. This is Stacey Golden-Lisnock, your financial advocate, and have a wonderful day. And Lorrie, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Stacey.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Legacy Therapy Podcast. If we hit it out of the park today and you learned at least one new thing to take action on in your own quest to planning the best legacy possible, then be sure to tell your friends, subscribe, and rate and review wherever you get your podcast. The show notes will provide the sites and information that were discussed today. You can get more great tips, resources, and inspiration by visiting our website, legacytherapypodcast.com.